Yeah. I keep it low key.
Chief,
I
hosted
keep
by
it low
Backpack
key.
Technologies LLC, and I'm your host, Jason Blair from Backpack Technologies. Today's guest is a local legend, at least in the Army IT field, right? A veteran, a good friend of mine, and somebody that I aspire to be like one day. Jared Shepard, CEO and chair of Hypori, founder and CEO of Intelligent Waves, and founder and executive chair of Warrior Ethos. Hey, Jared, how you doing?
Good, man. I appreciate you having me on. I know that's a lot of titles, but I think local legend isn't one of the ones that's appropriate.
Hey, I think you've earned it too. You know, like I said, a fellow veteran man, somebody that we can aspire to be like, and also even with the companies that you own and co-found and all that stuff, you know, you still find a way to give back. It's thank you for coming on. So we'll get to that in a little bit later. But hey, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to where we are now.
Yeah,
To where you are now.
yeah, sure. I'm the anti-CEO for a million reasons, right? I came up, kind of rough. A lot of it because of my own fault, right? You know, I mean, I joke, I've always been good at anything I do in life. And when I was young, I was a jerk and I was good at it. And so I got kicked out of my house when I was young. I ended up, at some point being homeless and living in the backseat of an abandoned car. Still to this day, my highest level of professional education is a GED. If you don't count all my, my certifications that I've been able to build over the time from a technology standpoint. But I joined the Army, I joined the infantry. I got to do some cool stuff, in the infantry, and then ultimately re-enlisted and became an IT guy, and then, worked for a 3-star general in the Army. And that opened my eyes kind of what the world was, because coming from where I came from, I didn't really have that perspective. And all of a sudden I'm a strap hanger in the corner, making lights blink, with really influential people in the room. And I decided I wanted to have a larger impact. And I think that kind of is what has driven me since.
Wow, that's incredible. We talk all the time, especially when it comes to these conferences and stuff like that. So I did not know that about you, especially the homeless part, and being a CEO. I'm not CEO, but what's the word I'm looking for? Just getting your GED, right? And that's something that really connects.
Like in our irony of it is my Army recruiter, paid for my GED out of his own pocket.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I had a ticket before I came in, right? And I was broke, and I knew I had the ticket. I was like, well, maybe once I join the Army, it'll go away or something. No, they found it, and same thing. My recruiter, he paid for my speeding ticket before I joined. So I guess they really needed to make those numbers back then. So.
Well, it's recruiting is a thankless job, but look at how many of us wouldn't be where we were if it wasn't for our recruiters, right? I mean, that's a tough thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're going to talk about a bring your own device, or a BYOD for those who don't know. And we're also going to dive a little bit into Jared's nonprofit Warrior Ethos, right? So on the surface, Jared, what is BYOD and what problems do they solve?
So and if you're okay with it, I'll give you a little context on Hypori and how we built Hypori. But to answer your question, BYOD is bring your own device, right? But it's the idea of using your personal device to access some type of protected enclave. So like, either whether it's a business enterprise, which would be the corporate application, or in the government's case, it's accessing NIPRNet, right? How do I get to NIPRNet? How do I get to my Army.mil address from my personal device in a way in which I don't compromise the Army's network, right, or the Army's data, and in a way in which I don't give up my personal privacy or freedoms of, control of my own device, so that I can have that access.
Okay. So you said you was going to go into a little bit of Hypori. I mean, that's
sure.
How does Hypori answer that call?
So the genesis of Hypori was actually, I started my first company, Intelligent Waves, 18 years ago, right? And I literally started it in Baghdad at the behest of a guy named General Odierno, to build out the very first COIC, Counter IED Operational Intelligence Center. I got to do some really cool stuff. I mean, I think I booked up over 46 months deployed in all the garden spots: Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Qatar, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, you name it, right? But what we really got good at was warfighting type technologies, right? And Intelligent Waves was really built on that. And then I was challenged by a senior leader, a guy named John Mulholland, who said, hey, you guys do really cool stuff. But what I really need is I need the ability to go naked man into a country, be able to do so securely without getting people arrested, shot, killed, targeted, etc. And the concept of naked man is go into a place with nothing, be able to successfully buy a phone off of a host nation market, knowing that the host nation market is compromised and the host nation network is compromised, and still be able to securely command and control. And that kind of became the genesis of what I bought was originally the IP of Hypori, and then bootstrapped and built it out of Intelligent Waves, and then spun it out as its own company, because we did this for this really kind of nichey, sensitive use case. But then my epiphany was like, wait, we just built a capability that enables you to go from a known compromised device on a known compromised network, get to a secure enclave that you can't compromise the data on. And a side effect to all of that, because our platform, I joke it, I say it was zero trust before zero trust was a thing. Our platform assumes your phone is already compromised. And so it doesn't want to interact with your phone in any way, shape, or form. So because, even visibility is a form of trust, right? And so we don't trust anything on that device, to include what it tells us is on the device. So we don't pay attention to any of that. And our platform by default, then the side effect of that, which I wish I could say we designed it that way, but it was a side effect that we now protect as if it was one of the most important things we ever designed, is you get to keep your privacy, right? So I can both protect the enterprise and protect your privacy simultaneously. And when we realized that was what we had built, the light bulb turned on. I was like, holy moly, like this is going to be way bigger than Intelligent Waves. And Intelligent Waves is awesome. It's full of great people doing great things, and it's last year was $100 million, 350 people, right? But Hypori is going to be so much bigger, because this is a problem set that doesn't just face this niche government use case. It faces, Department of Defense with, soldiers, Compo 2, Compo 3, so National Guard, Army Reserves. How does Sergeant Snuffy get access to NIPRNet when he doesn't get issued a government device, right? Yeah. How can he be at home with his kids on a Sunday watching football, and rather having to get up when first sergeant calls and go all the way into the office to get on a computer to sign a document, he can just whip out his phone and sign a document and be done, right? And be able to spend that family time at home. That was important, but also think about other regulated spaces, places where it's critical to protect information sets, not just Department of Defense, but what about like HIPAA? Healthcare information sets. What about banking? Think about financial information sets, SEC regulated data, trade information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And then it begins to cascade when you realize the potential impact of this is huge. So BYOD is the idea of using any edge piece of hardware to access a protected infrastructure with no ability to compromise that protected infrastructure, and without losing the privacy or control of that edge device.
Yeah. So you you must be reading my mind, because that goes right into like my third question. Like, so what are some of the problems associated with standard BYOD as it stands today, right?
So, before we got in the market, BYOD was usually defined by the use of what's called MDM, or mobile device management technology, which is where, they would install a client onto your phone and make sure your phone was secure, so that way you couldn't compromise the protected environment. The side effect of that is privacy. And there's a lot of side effects to it, because to be honest, you just can't successfully secure an edge device, right? You can actively try to protect, but to successfully secure it's such an evolving threat. Think about how many edge devices there are out there. Think about, how often they are on the network or not on the network. Did it get its latest patch? Did it not get its latest patch? Do you have a user who's downloading stuff that they shouldn't be downloading? Are they accessing websites they shouldn't be accessing that has malware embedded in it? There's all kinds of things that make it really, really, really difficult to secure an edge device. And that's what MDM or MAM try to do, is they try to secure either an application container or a device container on that edge device. And to be frank, it's next to impossible to do successfully. And it absolutely comes at a price, which is your privacy, right? Because if you go to a website that has malware on it, and that malware probes that secure container, it's going to report to your enterprise what the website was, right? And so then all of a sudden, your personal life is being reported in real time to your corporate entity or your government entity that you work for. And that goes counter to the idea of BYOD.
Mm-hmm. And everybody had those concerns, right? Especially, even in industry, right? When we just like, okay,
I'm still fighting it today. There's portions of the Army and others that want to use MDM as an alternative to my platform. So they're, I always joke, we have two Achilles heels, right? Achilles had two heels, not one. We do too. Because the nature of the way that we protect data, I don't have data resident on the edge device, right? Which means if you're on a bad network, you're going to experience, you experience latency or packet drops, et cetera. It will affect your user experience. And so we get some users that are like, oh, this sucks because when I'm on, X crappy network, I can't get access to Hypori. And we're like, well, yeah, but the price of that, there are times in which the user experience can be affected by the network, but in return, you get to keep your privacy and you don't compromise the enterprise environment. If you're willing to give up both the potential of the compromising the enterprise environment and your privacy, then maybe MDM is a better solution for you. But it's not really BYOD, right? And by the way, it's also, I know you're going to ask me about this, but it's also not compliant with policies or regulations or law even. So, I mean, there's a lot of challenges there.
Yeah. So, okay. So what is, in layman's terms, can you explain the virtual workspace?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the concept at its root isn't really new, right? VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, isn't new. Although the reason why they created virtual desktop infrastructure is not doing what we do, right? We take a much more difficult approach to things. VDI was built to reduce physical infrastructure, right? It was built for this place in which you own the network infrastructure. And rather than putting desktops on the edge, I'm going to virtualize them and allow you to access them, right? But that was usually, that was originally intended from a known protected network and a closed network, right? What we've done is we've taken that concept and then put it out in the wild. We put it on a wild network accessible from anywhere, from any edge device, right? And oh, by the way, we don't control the network, which that can be problematic at times, right? We joke like we have users in Europe and Asia that absolutely love us. They think we're the best thing since sliced bread. And then you could be in the wrong network in North Carolina and be like, this sucks because the network sucks, right? So it's a hard thing. But at the core, what we've done is we took what was called the Android open source protocol, where we took a Android operating system and then we wrote around it a tremendous amount of security protocol, right? Different ways in which we deliver security, collect information, et cetera, so that way we can meet all the promises that we talked about, protecting both the enterprise and protecting your privacy. I think we're at like 30 or 31 patents now around how we do this, on the edge device. But what it is you actually get your own dedicated operating system, mobile operating system that exists in cloud that you can access from any edge device, from your phone, from your tablet, from your PC, from somebody else's phone. I mean, it doesn't really matter, right? Because the edge device is simply just the interaction interface. It doesn't ever actually possess any of the data, which is fundamentally important to our approach, is no data in transit, no data at rest. And by having no data in transit, no data at rest, it means that I don't have any data exposed to intercept, to attack, or to exploitation.
Okay. All right. So no data at rest. So there's no way, if you're not connected to the network at all, right? So there's no way to, because, like you kind of alluded to, and, I've been all over the world and some networks are just crappy, right? And it's good that especially when it comes to Hypori, that we can access from anywhere, right? And be secure. But if there's no connection, but you still need to work on something, especially like even locally, right? Like a LAN, right? You're going between radios, but there's still no internet connection, right? Any way to get back to where the information needs to go, or where you need to pull it. How do you work then?
So, I mean, to be honest, we may not be the solution for that environment. There is no one tool that fits all requirements. Right. And so SOCOM originally came to us, and SOCOM was kind of the same thing. They were looking at us and they were like, hey, we love the security, but we're SOCOM. What happens if we're in a disconnected environment? And what we challenged them was like, how often are you actually in a disconnected? And they went back and looked at the problem set, and they came back and said, you know what, you're right. We're actually going to go with you guys. And we were like, okay, well, what did you guys come out with it? And they said, well, we figured out that realistically, we're disconnected about 1% of the time. And during that 1% of the time, we probably don't need to be on our freaking phones. So and it comes back to like, if you have a critical offline capability requirement, i.e., I want to download Intel and have that accessible in a place where I'm never going to be connected to the network. Got it. We're not your platform, right? But if you have, like, the Army does, 1 million users who need to have access to your unclassified network, and this is Sergeant Snuffy, Staff Sergeant Snuffy, Sergeant First Class Snuffy, First Sergeant Snuffy, Sergeant Major Snuffy, Lieutenant Snuffy, Captain Snuffy, Major Snuffy, Lieutenant Colonel Snuffy, right? They're maneuvering in between. We have no record message. Like, people are going to Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or Signal, all these unauthorized messaging platforms, because they don't have access to a mechanism in which they can safely or collaborate or communicate. We change that. We make that so that you can, and not only just collaborate, but actually share data, share CUI level data. I can, unlike even better than a government issued phone, You can get into Hypori and sign OERs or NCOERs. You can sign awards. You can do digital sign and encrypt. You can do CUI training. You can go to the SARB Major Academy and download your TRADOC training documentation and work on your CUI training academy stuff from home. So we offer all these capabilities that don't exist out there, but I can't fix disconnected, right? I mean, that is a key feature of our security, is that, because what we found from an aggressor standpoint, there are known aggressors out there now that what they do. One of the things that we saw is it manifested in New York. It originated out of some Eastern Bloc European countries. But what they would do is if they see you and are targeting you, they distract you. They take your cell phone, they drop it into a Faraday bag. It's called a Faraday bag, which of course blocks all radio transmissions, right? They take it over to the back of a van or a pickup. They put it on a box that's designed to actually replicate your phone one for one. So then they replicate your phone. Then after they've replicated your phone, they walk out and they dump your phone into a trash can somewhere. Well, so if your mechanism of security is something like MDM, then what happens is the minute you realize your phone is gone, you call your enterprise and you say, hey, my phone was stolen. They say, okay, got it. They go into MDM and they click delete, right? And so they want to brick your phones for safety's sake. Well, the problem is it hasn't been on the network. And so now bad guy replicates your device. They have a full replication of your device. They dump your device back out into the wild into a trash can. It connects to the network. MDM deletes it and reports back, hey, everything's safe. We deleted the phone. You're good to go, with no knowledge that they just replicated your entire device.
Yeah, but it shouldn't have access though, right? I mean, sure, whatever's on that device at the moment, which I think that's what you're alluding to, right? Is now in their hands.
Now in their possession. Yeah, is now in their possession, right? Yeah. So again, that comes back to the whole concept of data in transit, data at rest, right?
Yeah.
If we remove data in transit and data at rest, then the edge device doesn't matter. Anything that you were to steal in that device is irrelevant because there's no data there, right? But think about it think about the VA compromise, right, where the laptop got stolen out of the backseat of a guy's car. 72,000 veterans' records were on that laptop. But I mean, and if you think about that, like how much, and I get a lot of people who go, well, it's unclassified. It's not that important. Really? Like, are we looking in the mirror and being honest about that? I mean, remember what we used to call tactical secret is now called CUI, right? So when you start talking about when an organization gets activated, a brigade out of 18th Airborne Corps gets activated to go to war, where do you think that activation is coordinated on? Unclass. Where do you think all their stuff was bought? Unclass. Where do you think their travel orders, their resources, all this stuff was bought? Unclass. I mean, all that stuff is, the significant portion of our collaboration in the U.S. government, U.S. military, intelligence communities is done on the unclassified side.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, look, a lot of people know this already, but for those who don't know, like when we talk about this type of stuff, when we talk about unclass, right, you just need to get, maybe I shouldn't put this out there, but all you got to do, the enemy or whatever needs to just form a complete picture, right? And all of these bits of information that's out there, sure, means nothing. But once you put it all together, it can, damage the fabric of the mission of whatever we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
And, I say that in terms of military terms, but the same thing for a Fortune 500 company,
Absolutely. Oh, and in fact, maybe even more so for some of them. You look at like supply chain problems that, aviation companies have, Boeing. You look at, it doesn't matter what it is, right? You rely upon a accessible infrastructure to share information that may be the most important information you have. And by the way, like if you look at, let's talk about national defense, come back to national defense again. Mm-hmm. Why did the Chinese have a 5th gen fighter that looks just like ours? Well, it wasn't because they hacked the DOD's network. They hacked a contractor's network, right? And they stole the data from a contractor.
Wow. That's how they got it. So what challenges when it comes to implementing Hypori, right? So what challenges did you face when trying to get this implemented into the DOD outside of SOCOM, right? I'm not special operations, but the stigma is, hey, they want something, they're going to get it, right? But what about when it comes to the rest of the armed forces?
Well, I mean, SOCOM, yeah, people give SOCOM this Wild West, kind of reputation that it just does things all willy nilly. It really doesn't. They put a ton of resources and diligence into doing things, right? We are now SOCOM's, a secure communications platform, right? Across all SOCOM, which is awesome. But and you say what challenges did we face? Like as if we're done with those challenges. But so I mean, some of those challenges are challenges that we face today. We've spent tens of millions of dollars to build a capability that's compliant with policy, with regulation, that's actually secure, right? And then, when I face components who are willing to waive those policies or those regulations for other companies, like, what am I supposed to do? I mean, I'm like, wait a second, I just spent $22 million building this tool to do the following things, and you're going to give a waiver or certification waivers. Like, there's all these regulations. There's NIST, there's FIPS, there's DFARS, there's there's the law. So if you look at it, like, the Congress passed, what was it, 257 congressmen signed off on the ban of TikTok in the United States, right? The president put it out, the White House put it out. You're not allowed to have any device that can process or store CUI data that can also have access to TikTok or any ByteDance application out there, right? Well, MDM or MAM can't do that for you unless it fully locks your personal device down, right? But getting people to understand that is a challenge, because what happens is you get senior leaders who aren't technical who go, oh no, that they told me MAM it virtualizes the data. No, it doesn't. It just encrypts the data in an application container on the edge device, which means that you now have CUI data that resides on a same physical device that a nation state collection platform resides on. So we're always fighting that challenge. And often that challenge, it manifests in the form of educating, right? And you got it behind you. And I have a lot of ties into the warrant core. I rely really heavily on the warrants and the senior warrants and the senior communicators, often the listed senior communicators, because they're the ones that understand the technology, and they're the ones that then have to translate that technology to leaders, because leaders are making operational decisions at the speed of war, right? And so having warrants and having senior enlisted and having the officers that are still technical in nature be able to understand the actual threat, understand the actual requirement, so that commanders don't make decisions that put them into a position that they're exposing themselves, they're exposing their organization, they're exposing their data. That's the constant challenge. So we're fighting on all fronts. And then technically, you got to keep the platform secure. You got to keep evolving the technology. We've been through 7 agency red teams. I've been through more red teams than almost any security platform out there. But every time we pass one, we don't get to drop our guard and be like, okay, now we're done. We have to constantly be attacking, evolving. We have our own dedicated red teams. We have to constantly add new features, bring new features to the technology, because we've got to make it better. If you were a Hypori user in the Army and you used us a year and a half ago, the experience that you had then versus the user experience that you would have today is night and day different. We've made it way better. We've made lots of improvements, and we have to continue to make those. We'll never be done.
I want to touch on something that you just kind of mentioned. Commanders and leaders are making decisions at the speed of war, and that's very key. But it's also it's so difficult for them to make a decision or allocate resources towards a future problem. Meaning, the problem's already here. It just hasn't happened to them, or they haven't been directed to action it. But, hopefully, and I know they got to be praying this in the back of their mind. Like, I hope this doesn't happen on my watch. You know what I mean? So and I know that's a challenge for you. How do you get them to actually, to see like, hey, this is a real threat. What you guys are doing, just because you haven't been compromised or you don't know you've been compromised, doesn't mean that threat isn't out there, right? And I think that's something that I think a lot of us in industry, try to communicate to them. And at the same time, they're juggling a lot of pieces. I mean, these guys are not like the super technical, and everything that we, at least on the Army side that we do, it has to be done in a community versus how it's done on the in the industry market where everybody have their own responsibility. If I was a warrant, I was a warrant, I'm doing all the networking, maybe sometimes the servers, and I'm also, depending on resources, I'm also doing cybersecurity. That's 10 jobs for 10 different people with other people, right? But it's all wrapped up into one. So you also mentioned how your personal data is completely secure and from the government side or the secure side, right?
Because remember, no data at transit, no data at rest. That means they're actually physically separated, not logically separated, physically separated. They never coexist.
Okay. So how can you promise that? That you say physically separated on the same device, using the same resources? I mean, it's not like I got two.
It's not the same device. So that's the challenge. So you think about it. So Hypori, The application of Hypori is essentially a secure TLS tunnel that all it does is stream real-time what's called delta pixels, which are change pixels. So like if you're looking at me right now, you see my face moving, my hands moving, those pixels are streaming as a change, but the background doesn't change. So it doesn't need to restream those pixels except for an occasional refresh, right? So that becomes more bandwidth efficient, but it also isn't data. Like, yeah, okay, you can see the coins behind me right there, but you don't actually know what units those are. And you're not getting a report of the data that's associated with those coins. You're just getting an image representation of it. It's like watching the YouTube of a movie and then for you to tell me, all right, so read back to me what the script was. I don't know what that was, right? I don't have any of the background information on that. I don't know what camera was used at what angle or whatever, that I just got to watch the product. I didn't get to actually see the data. So all Hypori does is render pixels or an image of that operating system. And that operating system exists somewhere else. It doesn't exist on your device, which means the government data exists somewhere else. It doesn't exist on your device. So all our application needs to be able to do is render a picture to you. And then when you touch, type, or swipe, or use your camera or your audio, it needs to be able to send that data into the secure environment that then translates it into an action. So because those two things never actually coexist with each other, I don't know what you have on yours any more than you know what I have on mine.
And but you said you got red teams, right? And what other has any government like NSA?
Red teams, we've been attacked, exploited. We've been classified ones, unclassified ones, you name it, right? DOT&E, Director of Test and Evaluation, and Threat Systems Management Office has run against us 3 times. They went back and debriefed the DoD CIO that we're the most secure mobile platform ever tested to date. But I don't think that answers the question you're asking, right? You're asking about privacy. So we've struggled with, like, how do I prove to you? I mean, I can tell you, and you want to believe me, but how do I prove to you that I have no access to your edge device? Well, so one of the things we did is we went through SOC 2, Type 1 and Type 2 validation, which is SOC 2 is largely around HIPAA and HIPAA privacy, right? So we're SOC 2, Type 1, Type 2, privacy validated. And then one of the things that we've been really considering here recently is, like, I want to go in and get, a third party of some kind. And this really doesn't exist out there. Like, but whoever it is, NAACP, somebody to come in and look at our platform and go, you know what, this does protect the edge user's privacy. Because in reality, the technical side of this, like, I would welcome independent validation on the privacy side, simply that the FBI could come to me and be like, you're going to go to jail unless you can give me Jason's personal data off of his phone. I'm going to be like,
I got to go to jail.
Our platform just doesn't have the ability to. It has no ability to see by design, because if our platform could see your data, then that means it believes the information that's being presented to it from that edge device. And that alone is an attack mechanism, right? I can convince it that something is there.
Okay. So, all right, let's get off the security piece a little bit.
By the way, and just to say, one of the I hate to say it, but the proof's in the pudding for us is we are one of the only platforms out there, if not the only platform out there, that in a classified information spillage, right? Joe sends you a classified email and you open it up on Hypori on your personal device. They don't take your personal device. So I mean, and that's because there was never any classified data on your personal device. So they don't need to take your personal device. Right. That physical separation demonstrates that protection, right?
And like, so therefore, okay. So, all right. So let me think about this. What's the best way to answer this question? So everything connects to pretty much the application in the cloud or wherever it's resting, right? And so let's say I need to print out some documentation at home. How do I do that? I can't.
Not with me. No, okay. Because again, you're not in possession of the data. And so you can't print the data, because then that would require that you have access. You're taking data out of the secure enterprise and putting it on your unsecure printer.
What about some slickies right there? And I might have to edit this out. But what about if somebody do like a print screen, right? And do it
we
that
protect
way.
against print screens. So we when you say look at screen captures, if you do it on an Android device, it'll just deny you the ability to do it. If you do it on an iPhone, because we can't develop inside the iPhone's operating system, it'll let you do a screen capture, but then that triggers security protocols where I both know that you just took a screen capture and I can show exactly what you just screen captured. And then depending on the enterprise, depending on who it is, I can choose to lock you out. I can just simply log it and send a copy of it to the security folks. I can do any number of other things, but that's only if you're screen capturing Hypori. right? It's Hypori protecting itself. It's not anything to do with your personal device.
Okay. So, all right, like I said, I want to kind of pivot a little bit away from the security piece. So, what applications does Hypori have access to? I mean, is it currently, do you have to do some type of agreement with different companies, or is it?
We can support, so in our core, because remember, we started out as the Android open source protocol, right? So we can essentially support any Android application out there. And
Okay.
like in the Hypori environment today, in the Army, for instance, we have CUI training documents and pubs, so CUI, training publications, the manual for the pistol, the manual for the rifle. We have Esri, for instance, it has recently just teamed with us. And so geospatial information at the CUI level. So the actual Esri database is accessible from the CUI side of the house. IPSA, which is the Army's HR platform. So like you can go in and update your family records. You can go in and do all that kind of stuff from inside of Hypori. You can sign NCOERs. You can sign OERs. You can sign awards. And then of course the traditional things like Office 365, other Android-like applications that are your licensed applications. We can put into our environment.
Okay. So you might have already answered this, right? I mean, I've got a slew of questions, but man, you've already hit on a lot of them. So, but let's go a little bit deeper. So, how does the Hypori application, right, Halo application, support the zero trust architecture? I think I already know, but if you can explain it a little bit more, that'd be great.
So zero trust. I mean, zero trust is like the new buzzword, right? It used to be cloud, and I think there are still a lot of people out there that don't know what cloud actually is. Now it's zero trust. And I promise you, there's a ton of people out there that don't know what zero trust is, right? And it depends on which definition you want to go with. If you want to go with the academic definition of 5 towers or 7 towers of zero trust, et cetera, we address a portion of that, which is ultimately edge. Right? We protect the edge in a zero trust infrastructure environment by removing essentially the edge as an attack surface. So by allowing no data in transit, no data at rest from the edge device, we address the edge portion of the pillar of the zero trust environment, by making sure that you have to use multi-factors of authentication to authenticate access to an information set that doesn't even exist on your attack surface on the edge device. So you're remotely leaving your personal device, going into the government network or protected enterprise, validating who you are to access that data against your enterprise's zero trust principles of identity management or multi-factor authentication, et cetera.
Well, I mean, I guess that's the CEO. You definitely gave this a little bit of thought. Right. So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to go to Warrior Ethos, right? Can you tell us, well, before we switch gears, is there anything else I didn't hit on that you kind of want to talk about that makes Hypori stand out in the field of other BYOD providers?
The one thing I would say is like for other folks that are out there, even not just BYOD, maybe it's just, any technology that's trying to sell into government or corporate enterprise or anything else like that. One of the biggest challenges, you were talking about challenges that we face, and I implied that those things don't stop. I think our biggest enemy is the easy button, right? And it's not incompetence, it's not negligence, it's not any of those things. It is simply the easy button. So like if you look at me, often my number one competitor, although they have nothing to do with competing with me, they don't even have a platform that does what I do, right? But is Microsoft. Well, why Microsoft? Well, because Microsoft is the easy button. So, what people will do is they'll kind of go, well, so what am I trying to do? I'm trying to do remote management. Okay, can I do that with Microsoft? And Microsoft will respond and go, yeah, well, you could use MDM or you could use MAM. And without me digging into figuring out whether that's compliant with policies or regulations or whether that's actually legally possible, or whether that impacts my users' privacy, or what the secondary or tertiary effects of that are. It's just Microsoft, right? Who gets fired for hiring Microsoft? So it becomes the easy button. Oh yeah, let's just do that. That's easy, right? And whether that could be any of the big conglomerates out there, Microsoft or Cisco or whoever, right? When you're a small company trying to fight for a piece of the pie, trying to prove out that you've built something that's genuinely disruptive from a technology standpoint, your number one enemy is going to be the easy button.
That's probably true. And that's why they have the big contracts. So Warrior Ethos, tell us about it and how does it help transitioning veterans and veterans in general?
Yeah. So, I started Warrior Ethos 11 years ago for a couple of reasons. One, you heard about my background, right? Now I'm able to do these great disruptive, cool things like start my own companies and do stuff like that and bring new technology to the Department of Defense and provide great services anywhere in the world. And I was a high school dropout homeless kid that joined the Army, right? So that that became part of my foundation. And what I really want for Warriors Ethos is to give other guys and gals the opportunity to do the same thing, right? The opportunity to serve their country, to do something great while in uniform, and then when they get out, to do something else great, right?
Yeah.
You know, it shouldn't be a limitation. It should be the opportunity for you to go do something else disruptive, right? Because you did something important when you raised your hand and said, I do swear, support, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, right? Then what, right? Then what? And the genesis of that, you know, I told you I'd worked for General Odierno downrange. You know, he gave this great speech when I opened the very first COIC with my very first company. And it was just me in the room with him talking to all of his division commanders. It's one of the advantages of us IT guys, right? We get to hide in the corner sometimes. And when the lights are blinking, we get to be a part of some amazing things. And it caused me to have an epiphany. And my epiphany was, you know, the idea of the ultimate sacrifice, right? And you know, we were all born with the idea of the ultimate sacrifice. We were taught it in school, right? The idea of the ultimate sacrifice is giving your life for your country. And after I listened to General Odierno speak, and he was a great mentor of mine, I had this epiphany. And the epiphany was, that's a little bit of bullshit. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just short-sighted. I think the ultimate sacrifice is actually something much bigger than that. I think the ultimate sacrifice is absolutely giving your life for your country, 100%. That's this unrepayable sacrifice that can never be made up. The hole can never be filled in the family that lost that individual. There's nothing that our nation can do to heal from that loss of an individual. But I think there's more of that. And it could be losing your limbs. It could be a traumatic brain injury. It could be watching a buddy die. It could, you know, having to carry that baggage for the rest of your life, right? You know, it could be hell. It can just be being deployed and spending time away at the most critical time from your children, right? I think all those things are a form of the ultimate sacrifice. And so, you know, back when I had that epiphany, I decided, you know what, man, you know, and this is back when my company was me and one employee. And I was like, man, if I ever become more successful, I'm gonna try to find a way to give back. And you know, fast forward, I think it was about 18 months or so, I gave back the way most people gave back then. I wrote my first $134,000 check, a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project. And General Odierno, again, being a great mentor, he actually flew in and presented it to them on our behalf, which was really awesome. And then I donated to them for another couple of years after that. And in a process of doing that, I developed this narrative and interacting with a lot of wounded soldiers and veterans. And that narrative was found that there was one question that if I asked a wounded soldier or their family, and because back then it was a lot of wounded guys and a lot of wounded gals and talking to their families and this one question I'd ask every time, and it would always elicit like a very emotional response. And that question was, what's next? Right? Like, all right, I got it. You were injured and now you're recovering, but what's next? Right? And sometimes that would elicit fear, excitement, anger, frustration, you know, anticipation, you name it. Right? You know, but it was never just a simply, you know, a thoughtless question. And so fast forward, you know, I ended up meeting this young man. I had decided to depart Wounded Warrior Project at the time. And I met this young man who was a wounded signal guy out of USASOC. He was in a wheelchair. And I said, all right, you know, I asked him, of course, my narrative, right? You know, I talked to him a little bit. I'm like, all right, what's next? And he says, I don't know, man. You know, the Army's kicking me out. I'm injured. My wife left me. I'm a single father. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. And I was like, man, like, and luckily I knew the SOCOM leadership at the time. And I went to General McChrystal and I said, hey, sir, give me that kid. And he was like, you know, well, Jared, I'm transitioning. He's like, do you know Bill McCraven? And I was like, sir, I know of him, but I don't know him. And he was like, okay. So he introduces me to Bill McCraven. We talked for about 30 minutes about transition and walks me over to what's called the CARE Coalition in SOCOM, which is where they help wounded soldiers inside of SOCOM, and introduces me to the director of CARE Coalition and says, this guy can do anything he wants. So me being me, I don't just take one soldier. I go to Walter Reed and start recruiting. Right. And before you knew it, I had like 7 different wounded guys, mostly amputees, all different interning in my, you know, interning in my company. Right. And a lot of them would come to me. They'd be like, well, what do you do? IT. I don't want to do IT. Screw that. IT is just a product. Right. Business is business. Come and learn operations, come and learn recruiting, come and learn HR, come and learn finance, come and learn how you do a proposal. Like IT is just a product. Business is business. Right. And so I started having all these wounded SOCOM guys spend time with me. And eventually I get a call from the JAG, the lawyer for SOCOM. And he was like, hey, so how are you not spending more than whatever it was, like $40 a year on these guys? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he was like, well, they're technically still active duty soldiers. So you can't spend money on government employees. And I was like, screw you for calling me. And he was like, no. He was like, nah, like, look, we know you're doing good stuff, but like, you need to give the boss some top cover. And I said, well, how do I do that? And he said, I don't know, man. Like, start your own nonprofit or something. That became the birth of Warriors Ethos, right? And Warriors Ethos ever since then has been focused on what's next, right? And it's the idea of whether you're injured and you're separating, whether you just served for 3 years or 6 years, or whether you served for 30, right? What is next? And how do you plan for that, both personally, from a family standpoint, resume standpoint, interviewing, et cetera. Like, and we don't fish for you. We don't go find the job for you. We help better arm you so that you can go find it on your own and you can be proud of what it is that you found. And if you look at, like, often, I think the percentage is north of 90% of veterans don't stay in their first job for more than a year after they separate out of the military. And I used to think that was a really bad thing. And my epiphany over time is that no, it's because veterans, we are just naturally adaptive. And what happens is when we get out of the military, we end up at that, right around that 12-month mark, we end up looking back at it going, if I would have known this, I would have done it differently, or I would have asked for something different, or I would have done something different.
Well, with that though, I think too, there's this transition that happens in your head. When you're in the military, you have to do a thing. There's no real quitting. Even if you quit or get fired, you're still in, and you're going to still do a lot of the very similar things you were doing before. So when you get this first job, first opportunity, there's some type of loyalty because you're like, hey, these people are taking a chance on me. Like these guys, I want to do by these guys. I don't necessarily like the job, but they're different into me.
You're talking about one of the number one things I counsel guys on is like, look, when you take off the uniform, God and country, the doing things for God and country, that goes away.
Yeah.
Right. It has to be. Like, you can't be loyal to a company. A company is just a machine. Speaking from a guy who owns two, right? You can't be loyal to a company. A company is just simply a machine. It eats air, it eats fuel, and produces movement. And if you're not one of those three things, it's going to spit you out, no matter how loyal to it you are. Right.
Yeah.
And you can be loyal to people. You can be loyal to teams. You can be like, man, Jason's always taking care of me. I love Jason. I'll go anywhere he goes. All right, cool. But don't do it because of the company. And if you're ever in a company's environment where they're trying to convince you, if you leave, you're going to somehow hurt that company, then that company sucks. Like, I'm sorry. Like then that company sucks. When you take off the uniform, and this is on all my uniforms for a reason, right? But when you take off your uniform, that your first priority becomes you and your family. And it has to be that. Right. Everything else has to come second to that.
Well, but I was talking more to your point of the 90%, right? They have that switch, I think 9 months to a year, maybe even a little bit longer, that they come to that realization of what you're just talking about right now. Yeah. Like, wait a second, I don't have to stay here. Everybody's great, but I'm just unhappy. I don't fit here. Let me try to find somewhere where I fit. Right. And that could be a little disappointing sometimes because, you could also look at it like, hey, man, I'm a failure because it didn't work out, and I talk to people,
loss of purpose, all those things those are all. And that's the reason why Warriors Ethos exists. Right. Is what we're trying to do is that struggle that occurs in that first 2 to 3 years when you get out of the military. Yep. We're trying to help prepare you for that better. So that way it's not as heavy as the struggle. It's not as burdensome. You walk into it more with your eyes open, and I tell veterans all the time especially when I'm mentoring guys in transition, and I try to mentor one a week or so, myself personally, and we have a lot of great volunteer mentors that help in Warriors Ethos. I try to tell guys like, look, guys and gals, we're always worried, is the grass greener on the other side of the fence? Right. Well, here's the secret. It's just freaking grass.
It's just grass.
And it's just freaking grass. And if you water it, if you fertilize it, if you treat it right, it grows. Just like it did on this side, it does on that side too. Now, pay attention to the fence. The fence is the getting out process, the transition process, because you need to take care of yourself. You need to go to your appointments. You need to go to your VA appointments. You need to go to do all that stuff, right? You need to put the work in on your resume. You need to put the work in on going out and talking with your peers that separated before you and get an idea of what's out there. You need to put the work in on networking. You need to put the work in by sitting down with your spouse and establishing expectations and going, hey, look, I what's important to you and what we do next? Because when you're in the military, your spouse doesn't get to participate in that part, but now they do, right? And you've got to include them as a part of that process.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Jared. So what would you consider your biggest success story out of Warrior Ethos? Like, do you have a particular use case where it's like, man, this guy, I don't, or girl, I don't know if they're gonna be able to find anything, and they just surprise me.
Just out of Warriors Ethos.
Yeah, yeah.
My personal, my biggest success story, period. I thought that was you were going to give me a softball there. That's my kids, right? I mean, that's easy.
No, no, sir.
Out of Warriors Ethos, I think just being able to successfully get the organization up and running, even though it's not massive, right? We help a few hundred veterans a year, right? But and get it so that it's not just me, it's a lot of other people. It's a lot of other people who step up and commit and spend time and energy and resources helping their these veterans be successful in what they do next. And we always ask every one of these veterans, like, hey, once you've made this successful transition, our one ask, the one thing you owe us is you got to come back and help somebody else. And I think if I was to take anything that say is my one success, it's that. Now, if you're asking me for an individual, no, man, I have so many great stories of individuals. I have Medal of Honor recipients. I have guys that are double amputees, triple amputees that have just gone out and done amazing stuff professionally since, right?
Yeah.
I've had folks that were, that we had to go get out of a bar somewhere because they were trying to drink themselves to death and considering maybe worse, and who are now back in control of their lives and happy and proud and giving back, right? I mean, there's all different kinds of ways that manifests. I don't think any one of them is greater than another.
Okay, that's fair. I'll let you skate by on that answer. So, how can people get involved with?
Yeah, we need that. So, as most nonprofits, but Warriors Ethos specifically, I'll speak to, we need three things, right? We need obviously donations, which that helps us pay for the resume writers, that helps us pay for the transition counselors, that helps us, that kind of a thing, right? The second is volunteer. We need mentors. We need coaches. We need people who are willing to come and take a veteran under wing and go, hey, man, yeah, I did this a couple of years ago. Let me help. Like, if I was to do this over again, this is what I would have done differently. And you know what? I know a couple people you should talk to and hear their stories too. And hey, you got questions about your VA packet? Let me introduce you to somebody. Like, having somebody that you can walk through that process with, right? Because it's never dark when you're not walking alone. Right. And so, having somebody that can do that. So we love volunteers, right? That's a big thing for us. And then last is if you're watching this and you're in a position where you're a hiring manager or you're influencing hiring managers, hire veterans, right? And go back and question the process that veterans are being hired. I challenge you, go to your HR folks and be like, hey, how many years of service in the military is an equivalent to a bachelor's degree? And often you'll find HR people stumble over that and go, well, there is no equivalent. Okay, got it. So a GED guy like me with 7 years in service wouldn't be eligible for a job that requires a bachelor's degree. So we're saying a 21-year-old kid with a bachelor's degree is better qualified than somebody who served their country for 7 years, right? Go challenge them on that, right? And get your company to rethink those kind of things and to put some prioritization and emphasis on hiring veterans. So those would be the three things that I would say you can help with. And if you want to know where, warriorsethos.org. You see it on my shirt, but it's WARRIORS. So Warriors Ethos, ETHOS.org. Go there, click volunteer, click, contact us, reach out.
Good. Yeah, you see how Jared just kind of subtly reminded me how to say his company's name. I'm, my bad, Jared. But no, hey, I love it. I love the call to action. Everybody, you just heard how to get out there and how to help. So especially that's near and dear to something like me because I am a veteran. These are some programs I did not take advantage of, but I really wish I would have, because many times we try to do it by ourselves because we've been doing a lot of this stuff on our own. So we want to go out here. We got too much pride, too much ego. And sometimes we're successful, but dang, it's a struggle. And what Jared is talking about, like, hey, you don't have to struggle alone. You're going to be succcestrul either way. But
and it's also like, remember, like we often think we do things by ourselves, but if you look at it in hindsight, you really didn't.
Yeah,
there was always somebody there.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah,
you're right. There's people that come before you. There's people that's taking care of you that you don't even know about.
Right.
But a lot of times we just don't want to reach out for. I talk to veterans.
It's scary.
Most of my friends are veterans, right? So scared to ask for help. They're just scared.
It is.
It is. Yeah, man, get over that. But hey, look, I had to get over that quickly, right? Because I realized, hey, This is not the Army. And it took me 20 years to know what I knew, right? And now I'm trying to jump into something I have, experience in. So why would I be great at it, right? So,
but now here you are hosting your own podcast, knocking it out.
I appreciate it. So you already gave us the website for Warrior Ethos, right? What are other ways people get in contact you about intelligent ways or
I mean, obviously, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find there. Again, with all those titles I become really easily searchable. But you can go to intelligentwaves.com. You can go to hypori.com if you want to know about either one of the companies. If you have questions, just reach out to us. We have great teams on both sides of the house. I have way smarter people on my teams than I am. So if I didn't answer a question that you have, I guarantee I got somebody that does, that can. So yeah, but I appreciate you having me here, man.
I appreciate you coming on. Definitely, we went over a little bit, but hey, I just appreciate you taking the time to chat with Chief,
Yeah, man.
So
it's good to see you.
All right, man.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. I keep it low key.